So if you know what an AMF Roadmaster is, today's post is for you. If you don't worry about it. I have some car crashes I'll show you later on, so everybody wins. So for today's post, I really wanted to focus on action sequences and how a director who's directing two different movies might approach action sequences in those two different movies. And since we just finished the Tour de France this past weekend, I thought it'd be great to look at how bicycling is presented in movies. And when I think of bicycle movies, particularly about a bicycle race, the 1979 Breaking Away is the movie I think of, and it's directed by Peter Yates. Now, Breaking Away focuses on 4 recent high school graduates who are trying to determine what their next step in life is going to be. The cast has some familiar names. They may not have been super familiar in 1979, but they've since become more familiar. Led by the main character is played by Dennis Christopher. And Dennis has also appeared in movies like Chariots of Fire, and he played Leonardo DiCaprio's attorney in Django Unchained. So Dennis plays Dave, who's passionate about bicycle racing. He's enamored with the Italian racing team to the point that he begins to speak Italian. He even names his dog Fellini and begins singing songs in Italian to girls at the local university. His friends are played by Daniel Stern, who you might remember from City Slickers, the Home Alone movies. He's also got Jackie Earle Haley in the movie, who is pretty well known at this point as playing Kelly in the original Bad News Bears. Jackie Earle Haley has gone on to appear in Shutter Island, and he was nominated for an Oscar a few years ago for Little Children. The fourth member of this group is Dennis Quaid, who has been in 80-plus movies, I think. The Right Stuff, The Day After Tomorrow, and he was in the remake of Footloose most recently. Now, the guys call themselves cutters, and cutters is a term for people who live in Bloomington but aren't associated with Indiana University. And the name comes from the stone quarries that were around town that their families had traditionally worked in. They would cut stone. So it was a way of defining people who were sort of the educated members of the town versus the laborers of the town. And they adopted this sort of derogatory term of cutters, and that became their nickname. Now, the cutters had run-ins with a lot of the male members on campus, a lot of the fraternity guys. And during one of these disagreements, the president of Indiana University, who was actually played by the then president of Indiana University, Dr. John Ryan, steps in and says to the guys, since you're so into bicycling, I'd like to invite you to be part of our Little 500 bicycle race. Now, the Little 500 is a real race. It happens at Indiana University. It's been happening there for decades. And like the Indianapolis 500, it's 500 laps, but of teams riding bicycles around the track. The guys accept the invitation, and they join the race. So my first movie that we're going to focus on is the action sequence of the actual race from the Little 500. The second movie, also directed by Peter Yates, that we're going to focus on, came out 9 years earlier, and it's called Bullitt, and it starred Steve McQueen and Jacqueline Bisset. Steve McQueen plays Frank Bullitt, who is a San Francisco police detective who's been assigned to protect a witness against the mob. As part of his protection phase, he actually, one day while he's out, notices 2 mob hitmen and decides to follow them. And what results is perhaps the first sort of classic car chase in movie history. It's iconic. It was trend-setting. It's what people talk about when they talk about the movie Bullitt. So, same director, Peter Yates, and we're going to compare and contrast a bicycle race from 1979 with Breaking Away and a car chase through the streets of San Francisco from 1968 in the movie Bullitt. All right, so first up I want to compare the vehicles from the two scenes. For Breaking Away, all the racers are using the same bicycle. It's an AMF Roadmaster. It's a fixed gear with coaster brakes, pretty straightforward, pretty common bicycle for the time. For Bullitt, we have 2 different cars. The hitmen are actually in a 1968 Dodge Charger. It's a 440 Magnum, and Steve McQueen is going to be driving a 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback. Very evenly paired cars, very similar power, If I had to give an edge, I believe the Dodge is slightly faster than the Mustang. So for comparison, we've got the bicycles, which are all uniform and they're all people powered. So the difference is the rider. In Bullitt, we've got two different cars, but they are very evenly matched. Both 1968s, both powerful muscle cars for the time. One of the things that really struck me about both sequences is the audio track. If you listen to both sequences, there's no bed music, there's no soundtrack to these scenes, either one of them. They use the natural sound of the experience. People cheering and breaking away, the PA announcer, the sounds of the bikes going by, the yells of among the riders themselves.
Rider for the Cutter team is still out front. We've learned he has just come in for an exchange.
And if you look at Bullitt, it's all the street sounds, the muscle car engine noises, the tire squealing, all those things. There's no music, there's no additional sound effects. It's just what's natural. So again, very similar between the two sequences, very unusual, no music, just natural sound. When it comes to camera placement between the two films, you'll see a lot of similarities as well. Peter Yates used a lot of wide shots in both scenes. He wanted to show the full action. So you've got a lot of wide shots with nice, slow, even pans, just to follow the action as it comes by or as it goes around the track or comes down the street. Now, that's not to say he only used wide shots. He also used overhead shots in both scenes. For the racers, you see the racers going around the corner. Again, to sort of give perspective and speed about who's in which position. And within Bullitt, you've got shots of them going around corners down the street. Now, in addition to these wide shots, Peter Yates also had the camera placed in some unusual locations to put you in the middle of the action as the audience. So in Breaking Away, there's this great shot where the camera is on the back wheel of one of the bicycles. In Bullitt, he puts the camera in the back seat of the car. So you see the drivers and you get the experience as if you were actually in the car. He also liked to bring the action to you. So he would have scenes where the camera was stationary as either the bicycle riders were coming by, particularly in the transitions when they were changing out riders on the bike. And in Bullitt, he would put the camera on the side of the street and have the cars come by, including one time where the car crashed into the car that was holding the camera. Peter Yates really told the story with where he placed the camera and what shots he was using. So at the beginning of both Bullitt and Breaking Away, there are lots of shots of the main characters jockeying for position. In Breaking Away, he's trying to work his way through the pack and finally gets around them. But in Bullitt, he's avoiding traffic or he's working around past trucks and buses that may be on the street. So you've got this sort of jockeying where they're not in a full sprint race. They're actually sort of getting in position. It hasn't really begun a full high-speed race yet or high-speed chase yet, but it has begun a slow sort of pursuit, and then it'll kick in. And the thing that really kicks it in is you'll see in Bullitt, one of the hitmen actually buckles in at one point when he knows the race is about to start, when the chase is about to start. And with Breaking Away, about halfway through the race, after Dave is injured, he actually asks his teammates to buckle in his feet or strap in his feet onto the pedals. So he's now in the full race at this point. He can't get off the bike anymore. He's now locked into the bike. So you have both of them buckling up for a bigger part of the climax of the race, or the chase if you're watching Bullitt. Continuing using the camera for storytelling and how he cuts the scenes for storytelling, we don't really have a great sense a lot of time while we're watching Breaking Away about what lap they're on, like how much further is to go. Likewise, in Bullitt, there's no finish line necessarily that we know. We don't know that they're trying to get somewhere. They're just, one car is trying to get away from the other car. Some of the techniques he's used in both these scenes is in Breaking Away, he has a PA announcer.
Rider for the Cutter team is still out front.
The PA announcer is a guy actually named Dave Blaze, and Dave Blaze was the inspiration for Breaking Away. He was a rider in the 1962 Little 500 race, and the screenwriter was on his team and sort of was inspired by that story to write the screenplay for Breaking Away. In Bullitt, we have to use geographic milestones to sort of figure out where they are. So as they're going through Russian Hill, you see them at moments going down to Ghirardelli Square. They then start to exit the city, heading towards San Mateo. So you've got all these different things. You're going from a very urban environment, very hilly, sort of the typical Russian hill environment of San Francisco, out into more of the more suburban areas towards San Mateo. And that's sort of showing that the race is progressing, or the chase is progressing in Bullitt. Now, both of these films, both these action sequences, have sort of excitement to them with crashes and recoveries. You see in Breaking Away, Dave gets knocked down. He actually injures himself. In Bullitt, there are side swipes, there are car crashes that happen to both cars throughout the chase. Then you've got recoveries. So Dave gets back on the bicycle. His teammates help him out, and they actually get into the race as well. And in one scene in Bullitt, you've got Steve McQueen, who actually missed the turn, does a reverse burnout to get back in line, and takes off again. So both of them are having flaws. It's not a perfect run for either team, whether it's the bicycle race or Steve McQueen in the car. They're recovering and they're making adjustments as they go along. Both sequences have a definitive start, and they also have a definitive end. For Breaking Away, it's pretty obvious where those are. There's a start to the race, and then there's a finish. With Bullitt, the race really starts, or the chase really starts, when he notices the car and gets into them, and they do this little sort of cat and mouse for a little bit until Steve McQueen comes in behind them, and then the race really starts. The finish for Bullitt is much more dynamic. There's no finish line. As they're leaving San Francisco and they're driving down the highway, they get into a sideswipe and they start getting into traffic, and the hitman's car actually tries to pass on the inside, gets knocked around by a truck, and as they're recovering, one of the second hitman pulls out a shotgun and starts shooting at Steve McQueen's car. Steve McQueen moves back and looks like he nudges them from behind, maybe a pit maneuver, knocks them off the side of the road, and the hitman's car goes into a gas station where it explodes, and we see both hitmen burning in the car as the horn goes off on the car. So the similarities here are that in both sequences there is a definitive start and a finish. We just don't know exactly where it was going to be in Bullitt, but there was a definitive finish, and there are no ties. There's only winners, Steve McQueen and the Cutters, and there's only losers, the fraternity guys and the hitmen. One of the things that was really striking about Bullitt when it came out in 1968 was how long this action sequence was, this car chase. It's 10 minutes and 53 seconds. That's a long action sequence for 1968. So I did a timer on Breaking Away, and wanted time from the actual start of the race to they cross the finish line, and it, by my clock, was 11 minutes and 31 seconds. So again, you've got a fairly long action sequence, but it is the climax of the movie. So it's great to sort of see that they're very similar in time. They're only off by about 45 seconds. One of the things that was really striking about both these action sequences is that the actors did a lot of the action in the films. So in Breaking Away, the four actors of the Cutters actually were riding the bicycle. They were doing the race. And it's not a very stunt-intensive scene, but they were actually doing it. You could see their faces. There are plenty of close-ups of them in the middle of the pack, of them racing. They're actually doing the riding. In Bullitt, it's a little bit more dynamic. Now, Steve McQueen, it said, intentionally moved his head closer to the window as he was driving because he wanted the audience to see that he was doing the driving. Now, in some of the stunts, there were stuntmen doing the driving, but Steve McQueen did a lot of it, and you can actually see him in a lot of these shots. The story is that Steve McQueen was a little embarrassed because in The Great Escape, he had this sort of dramatic motorcycle jump that his character did. A stuntman did that jump. And for years, Steve McQueen was embarrassed that he didn't do that jump. So people would ask him what it was like to do the jump. He couldn't say anything about it because someone else actually did it. So when it came time to do Bullitt, he really insisted on doing as much of the driving as they would let him do. And he did a lot of the driving. So a lot of times when you see this Mustang driving, it is Steve McQueen in the driver's seat. There's no denying that these two films are very different. But stylistically, you can see Peter Yates' fingerprints on both of these action sequences. First, you can see it in the audio track. You've got, in each one of them, there's no bed music. There's no music playing throughout either one of them. Instead, Yates uses the natural sound of the action to be the soundtrack, whether it's the tire squealing, the engines revving, and the crashes happening in Bullitt, or the crowd cheering and the PA announcer of Breaking Away. You also see it in how he uses the camera. Both sequences feature nice wide shots with longer cuts that show the action as it comes by. And both have the camera in the middle of the action, whether it's in the backseat of the car in Bullitt, on the bike in Breaking Away, or in the middle of the pack in Breaking Away. And then finally, you can see it in his storytelling techniques. Both sequences have a strong beginning and a strong end, and he also identifies a definite winner and a definite loser in both of the sequences. All these add up to a much more engaging experience for the audience. So that's my comparison of Bullitt and Breaking Away. I want to go to the countdown. Today we talked about those two films, Bullitt from 1968, Breaking Away from 1979. And if we go to our tote board, I believe that brings us down to 999,981. If you have a favorite action sequence, maybe a favorite sports movie, or even a favorite car chase, I'd love to hear about it. Please put it in the comments below. I'll take a look at it. Maybe I can include it in a future episode of A Million Movies. If you did enjoy it, today's vlog, I really hope that you'll click the subscribe button. That really helps me out. And I hope to see you very soon on a next episode of A Million Movies.